The moment I walked into the club in that daring red dress, I felt the heat of eyes on me, but I never imagined one pair belonged to the neighbor who'd been silently watching me for months. I'll admit, it wasn't my proudest moment. Standing in front of the mirror that night, adjusting the straps of a red dress that clung to every curve I hadn't bothered to show off in years, I barely recognized myself. The woman in the reflection wasn't Lauren Evans, the marketing manager with deadlines stacked as high as her insecurities. She wasn't the tired wife of Brian, who spent more time scolding her for not folding the laundry the right way than noticing how her shoulders slumped further each day. No, the woman in the mirror looked bold, reckless even, and I wasn't sure whether I admired her or resented her for making me do this. Jesus Christ, Lauren, what are you trying to prove? Brian's voice cut through my thoughts like a dull blade. He was standing in the doorway, his tie loosened but still clinging to his neck, as if even off-duty he couldn't let himself relax. His eyes scanned me with a mix of irritation and something else, something darker, like he didn't quite recognize me either. "I'm going out," I said simply, running my fingers over the hem of the dress, pretending not to notice the way his jaw tightened. "In that?" he scoffed. "You're practically begging for attention." That stung, but I wasn't about to let him see it. "Maybe I am," I shot back, the words coming out sharper than I intended. His laugh was cold, humorless. "Don't expect me to come running when you don't like the kind of attention you get." I stared at him for a moment, half hoping he'd take it back, half hoping he'd say something else, anything that didn't feel like a slap in the face. But he just turned and walked out of the room, half leaving me there with the ghost of his disapproval hanging heavy in the air. The truth is, I hadn't planned this. I wasn't the kind of woman who wore short dresses or drank overpriced cocktails or let strangers' eyes linger on her for too long. But I was tired, bone deep, soul-crushingly tired. Of my job, of my marriage, of waking up every day to the same beige walls and the same conversations that felt more like obligations than connections. So when my coworker Melissa invited me out for a girls' night at some trendy new club downtown, I said yes, before I could talk myself out of it. And when I opened my closet and found nothing but sensible blouses and mom jeans, I drove straight to the nearest boutique and bought the first dress that made me feel like I was invisible. By the time I pulled up to the club, my nerves were buzzing like live wires. The parking lot was packed, neon lights spilling out from the entrance as a line of people, young, carefree, everything I wasn't, waited to get in. I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror and almost turned around, but then I thought about Brian's sneer, the way he'd dismissed me like I was nothing more than a nagging shadow in his periphery. Screw it, I thought. Inside, the bass thumped so hard I could feel it in my chest. The air was thick with perfume, sweat, and the faint sting of vodka spilled on polished floors. Melissa and the others were already there, laughing and leaning into each other like we weren't all old enough to know better. "Lauren, you made it?" Melissa's voice was already too loud, her cheeks flushed from whatever fruity concoction she was holding. She pulled me into the circle, handed me a drink, and for a moment, I let myself sink into the noise, the laughter, the chaos of it all. It felt good, better than I expected. Men were looking at me, really looking, and for the first time in years, I didn't shrink under their gaze. I danced, I laughed, I drank more than I should have. And then I saw him. At first I thought I was imagining it. The way he leaned against the bar, one hand resting on his drink, the other tucked casually into the pocket of his dark jeans. Ethan. He was my neighbor. The young guy who lived 2 doors down in the apartment complex I'd moved into after Brian and I sold the house. I didn't know much about him, only that he was a graphic designer, always had music playing in his unit, and occasionally nodded hello when we passed each other in the hall. But tonight, he wasn't just some friendly neighbor. His eyes were on me, dark and focused, and when our gazes met, he didn't look away. I felt a strange pull, something electric and unnerving. I wasn't sure if it was the alcohol, the music, or the way his lips curved into a slow, knowing smile, but I suddenly felt like I couldn't breathe. "Lauren, are you okay?" Melissa's voice cut through the haze, but I couldn't answer. Because Ethan had started walking toward me, and I couldn't look away. The air inside the club was intoxicating, heavy with perfume, alcohol, and something deeper, something almost primal. I wasn't used to this kind of environment. The flashing lights, the bodies moving together on the dance floor, the energy so alive it buzzed in my veins. It was overwhelming, but it was also thrilling. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't thinking about deadlines or Brian's tired sighs or the ache in my chest that never seemed to go away. "Come on, Lauren, loosen up," Melissa shouted over the music, pulling me toward the bar. She was already 2 drinks in, her blonde curls bouncing. As she laughed at something, one of the bartenders said, "I ordered something fruity and bright, definitely not my usual, but tonight wasn't about being usual. It was about forgetting, about pretending I was someone else, someone who didn't care about the consequences." Melissa handed me the drink, her eyes scanning the room like a hawk. "You see anyone you like?" she teased, leaning in close. I laughed, shaking my head. "I didn't come here for that." "Oh, please." She rolled her eyes. "You've got men looking at you like you're the main course at Thanksgiving dinner. And in that dress? Girl, you're killing it." I smiled, a little embarrassed, but also flattered. She wasn't wrong. I could feel the stares, the way heads turned as I moved through the crowd. It was a kind of attention I hadn't felt in years. And though a part of me wanted to shrink away from it, another part, a bigger part, soaked it in. We made our way to the dance floor, and before I knew it, I was moving. The music was loud and fast, the bass pounding in time with my heartbeat. Melissa and the others were cheering me on, but I barely noticed them. I was lost in the rhythm, in the way the dress clung to my body, in the way I felt alive for the first time in so long. And then I felt it. That prickling sensation, like someone was watching me. At first I thought I was imagining it. But when I turned, my eyes met his. Ethan. He was leaning against the bar, a drink in his hand, his dark hair slightly tousled like he'd just rolled out of bed. He was wearing a black button-up shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, showing off forearms that I shouldn't have been noticing but couldn't help myself. Ethan was my neighbor, the quiet guy who lived 2 doors down, the one I passed in the hallway with polite nods and occasional small talk about the weather. I didn't know much about him, other than he worked from home as a graphic designer and seemed to have an endless rotation of vinyl records playing in his apartment. But right now, he wasn't just the nice neighbor with a good taste in music. Right now, he was watching me like he'd been waiting for this moment, like he'd been waiting for me. I froze, my body stilling mid-dance. He didn't look away, didn't even flinch when our eyes locked. Instead, he raised his glass slightly, a small smirk playing on his lips. It was confident, almost cocky, but not in an overbearing way. It was the kind of smile that said he knew exactly what he was doing, and he knew I knew it too. "Lauren?" Melissa nudged me, her voice cutting through the haze. "Yeah? You okay?" "Yeah," I said quickly, turning back to her. "I'm fine." But I wasn't. My pulse was racing, my skin felt hot, and I couldn't shake the feeling of his eyes on me. Over the next hour, I tried to lose myself in the music again. But it was impossible. Every time I glanced toward the bar, Ethan was there, watching. Not in a creepy way. It wasn't that kind of stare. It was focused, deliberate. Like he was trying to figure me out. And the worst part? I didn't hate it. At one point, he disappeared, and I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. But then, as if on cue, he appeared on the dance floor, weaving his way through the crowd until he was close enough that I could feel the heat radiating off him. "Lauren," he said, his voice low, smooth, and far too familiar for someone I barely knew. I turned, startled. "Ethan? Didn't think I'd see you here," he said, his lips curving into that same smirk. "I could say the same thing," I replied, my voice coming out more defensive than I intended. He chuckled, leaning in slightly so I could hear him over the music. "I don't usually come to places like this, but I guess tonight's full of surprises." I swallowed hard, my mind racing. What was he doing here? Was this a coincidence, or— "You look amazing, by the way," he said, cutting off my train of thought. My cheeks flushed. "Thanks." He didn't say anything else, just stood there, his eyes holding mine in a way that made it impossible to look away. The air between us felt charged, like a live wire sparking with unspoken words. I started, but before I could finish, Melissa grabbed my arm. "Come on, we're getting another round," she shouted. dragging me toward the bar. I glanced back over my shoulder, but Ethan didn't follow. He just stood there watching me go, his smirk lingering like a promise. By the time we got our drinks, I was starting to feel the effects of the alcohol. My head was buzzing, my body loose and warm, and my inhibitions were slipping away faster than I could catch them. Melissa was flirting with the bartender, and the others were scattered across the club, leaving me alone for the first time all night. I sipped my drink, letting my eyes wander, and that's when I saw him again. This time, he was closer, leaning against a pillar just a few feet away. He wasn't trying to hide it now, he was staring openly, unapologetically, and when our eyes met, he started walking toward me. My heart leapt into my throat. I should have turned away. Should have gone back to my friends, but I couldn't. I was rooted to the spot, watching as he closed the distance between us like he had all the time in the world. When he stopped in front of me, I could feel the heat radiating off him. He was taller than I remembered, and up close, his presence was almost overwhelming. "You okay?" he asked, his voice softer now, but still carrying that same confidence. "Yeah," I said, though I wasn't sure it was true. He tilted his head slightly, studying me. "You sure? You looked like you needed some air." I hesitated. "Maybe." He smiled, and for a moment I forgot how to breathe. "Come on," he said, nodding toward the exit. "Let's get out of here for a bit." The cold air hit me like a slap the moment we stepped outside. The music still thumped faintly in the background, muffled by the thick glass doors of the club. The sidewalk was alive with people, groups of friends laughing, strangers smoking in clusters, the occasional couple pressed too close to each other in the shadows. But here, standing next to Ethan, it felt like we were in our own bubble. The chaos around us muted, distant. I crossed my arms over my chest, suddenly hyper-aware of how exposed I felt in the red dress. Ethan shrugged off his leather jacket without a word and draped it over my shoulders. His scent clung to the fabric, clean and woodsy, with just a hint of something darker, sharper. "Thanks," I murmured, pulling it tight around me. "You didn't look like you were having fun in there," he said, leaning casually against the wall, his hands tucked into his pockets. I glanced at him, unsure of how to respond. "It's not really my scene," I admitted. "Could have fooled me," he said, his lips quirking into that familiar smirk. "You looked like you belonged out there, dancing like you owned the place." I let out a nervous laugh, shaking my head. "I think you're giving me too much credit." "Am I?" He stepped closer, just enough that I had to tilt my head to look up at him. His eyes searched mine, and for a moment I thought he might say something else, something that would shatter whatever fragile balance we'd stumbled into. But then the door burst open, and a group of drunk 20-somethings spilled out, laughing and shouting as they stumbled past us. The moment broke, and I stepped back, suddenly needing more space, more air. "Ethan," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "What are you doing here? At the club, I mean." His expression didn't change, but there was something in his eyes, a flicker of hesitation maybe, that made me think the question caught him off guard. "I could ask you the same thing," he said, deflecting with ease. I raised an eyebrow, crossing my arms again. "I don't usually see you at places like this. You don't seem the type." "And what type is that?" he asked, his tone teasing but his gaze sharp. "You know," I said, gesturing vaguely toward the club. "Loud music, overpriced drinks, strangers grinding on each other." He laughed, low and rich, the kind of laugh that felt like it was meant just for me. "You've got me figured out, huh?" I shrugged, but I couldn't help the small smile tugging at my lips. "Something like that." "I could say the same about you," he said, his voice dropping slightly. "You don't strike me as someone who ends up in a place like this unless she's trying to get away from something." The words hit harder than they should have, cutting through the alcohol haze and landing squarely in my chest. He wasn't wrong, but hearing it out loud, from him of all people, made it feel too real. I looked away, focusing on a crack in the pavement instead of his face. "Maybe I am." Before he could respond, a shout broke the tension. "Hey, you good over there?" I turned to see a man stumbling toward us, his shirt half untucked and his grin sloppy and wide. He was clearly drunk, and his eyes flicked between me and Ethan with a kind of lazy curiosity that made my skin crawl. "We're fine," Ethan said, his voice calm but firm. The man didn't seem to care. He staggered closer, his attention zeroing in on me now. "Damn, you're gorgeous," he slurred, his grin widening. "You here alone?" I took a step back, instinctively pulling Ethan's jacket tighter around me. "I'm not interested." "Aw, come on," the man said, his tone turning whiny. "Don't be like that, let me buy you a drink." "She said no," Ethan said, stepping between us. His posture was relaxed, but there was an edge to his voice now, a warning that was impossible to ignore. The man blinked, swaying slightly as he looked up at Ethan. For a moment, it seemed like he might back off, but then his grin turned into a sneer. "What, you think you're her boyfriend or something?" Ethan didn't respond, but the look he gave the guy was enough to make even me shiver. It wasn't angry or aggressive, it was quiet, measured, like he was already 2 steps ahead of whatever was about to happen. "Walk away," Ethan said, his voice low but steady. The man hesitated, his bravado faltering under the weight of Ethan's gaze. After a few tense seconds, he muttered something under his breath and stumbled off, disappearing into the crowd. "You didn't have to do that," I said once the man was gone. Ethan turned back to me, his expression softening. "Yeah, I did. I didn't know how to respond to that, so I didn't. Instead, I looked down at my hands, at the chipped nail polish that suddenly felt glaringly out of place against the sleek fabric of the red dress. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice gentler now. "Yeah," I said, but it came out too quickly, too defensive. He tilted his head, studying me again like he had inside the club. "You don't have to lie, you know." "I'm not lying," I said, but the words felt hollow, even as I said them. He didn't push, but the silence that followed was heavy, filled with all the things I didn't want to admit. "Come on," he said finally, nodding toward the street. "Let me drive you home." I hesitated, my instincts warring with my exhaustion. Part of me wanted to say no, to insist that I could take care of myself, but the other part, the part that was tired and vulnerable and too raw to fight, won out. "Okay," I said quietly. His car was parked a few blocks away, and the walk was quiet, the air between us thick with unspoken tension. I could feel his presence next to me, steady and solid, and for some reason, it made me feel safer than I had in a long time. When we reached his car, he opened the door for me without a word. I slid into the passenger seat, the leather cool against my legs, and watched as he rounded the hood and climbed in beside me. Neither of us spoke as he started the engine and pulled out onto the street. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, but it wasn't exactly easy either. It was loaded, charged, like we were both waiting for something to happen but too afraid to make the first move. "You don't have to do this," I said finally, breaking the silence. "Do what?" "Drive me home. Be nice to me." He glanced at me, his brow furrowing slightly. Why wouldn't I? I didn't have an answer for that, so I looked out the window instead, watching the city lights blur past. By the time we pulled into my driveway, the tension in the car was almost unbearable. I reached for the door handle, desperate for the escape, but his voice stopped me. "Lauren." I turned, my hand hovering over the handle. He hesitated, his fingers drumming lightly against the steering wheel. "I meant what I said earlier. You look amazing tonight." The sincerity in his voice caught me off guard, and for a moment, all I could do was stare at him. "Thanks," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. He nodded, his gaze lingering on me a moment longer before he looked away. "Good night?" "Good night," I said, slipping out of the car and into the cold night air. But as I walked to my front door, my heart pounding in my chest, I couldn't shake the feeling that this night wasn't over yet. I closed the door behind me and leaned against it, letting out a long, shaky breath. The silence of my house was jarring after the noise and chaos of the club. But it wasn't comforting. It was the kind of silence that pressed down on you, magnifying every doubt, every thought you tried to suppress. I kicked off my heels, letting them clatter to the floor, and pulled Ethan's jacket tighter around my shoulders. I should have handed it back to him before I got out of the car, but something about it made me feel anchored, like his presence was still with me. Walking to the kitchen, I poured myself a glass of water and stood there, staring at nothing in particular. My reflection in the window caught my eye, a woman in a red dress, her hair slightly mussed, her lips still painted a deep crimson. She looked different. Alive, maybe, or desperate. I wasn't sure which, and I wasn't sure it mattered. A soft knock at the door snapped me out of my thoughts. For a moment, I thought I'd imagined it. But then it came again, firmer this time. My heart leapt into my throat as I made my way to the door, each step feeling heavier than the last. When I opened it, Ethan was standing there. "Forget something?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. His eyes flicked down to the jacket still draped over my shoulders, and he smiled faintly. "Not exactly." He stepped closer, just enough that I had to tilt my head to look at him. His gaze was dark, intense, and it sent a shiver down my spine. "I wasn't sure if I should come back," he admitted, his voice low. "But I couldn't stop thinking about you." The air between us felt charged again, like it had outside the club, only now there was nothing to break the tension. No drunken strangers, no pounding music, just us, standing in the quiet of my dimly lit entryway. "You shouldn't be here," I said, but the words lacked conviction. "Do you want me to leave?" he asked, his voice softer now, almost a whisper. I should have said yes. I should have closed the door and gone upstairs to bed, pretended this night never happened. But instead, I stepped back, silently inviting him in. He hesitated for only a moment before following me inside, closing the door behind him. The sound of the lock clicking into place felt louder than it should have, echoing in the stillness of the house. I led him to the living room, my bare feet sinking into the plush carpet. Neither of us spoke as I sat down on the couch, pulling his jacket off my shoulders and folding it neatly beside me. Ethan remained standing, his hands tucked into his pockets, his eyes never leaving mine. The way he looked at me, it was like he saw everything I tried to hide, every crack in the facade I'd spent years building. "You don't have to do this," he said finally, breaking the silence. I frowned, confused. "Do what?" "Whatever it is you think I want from you." His words caught me off guard, and for a moment, I didn't know how to respond. But then I realized something. He wasn't just offering me an out, he was challenging me, daring me to make a choice. "I don't know what I'm doing," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. He smiled softly, his eyes warming. "That makes two of us." He sat down beside me, close enough that I could feel the heat of his body, but not so close that it felt invasive. The silence stretched between us, thick and heavy, until I couldn't stand it anymore. "Why did you come back?" I asked, turning to face him. His gaze dropped to my lips before meeting my eyes again. "Because I couldn't walk away. Not from you." The honesty in his voice was disarming, and I felt my defenses crumbling faster than I could rebuild them. "Ethan," I started, but before I could finish, he leaned in. It wasn't a sudden movement or an aggressive one. It was slow, deliberate, giving me every opportunity to stop him. But I didn't. When his lips met mine, it was like the world tilted on its axis. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, but it quickly deepened, his hand cupping my face as he pulled me closer. I don't remember how it happened, how we went from sitting on the couch to me straddling his lap, his hands gripping my waist like I might disappear if he let go. My fingers tangled in his hair and he groaned softly against my lips, the sound sending a jolt of electricity through me. It was intoxicating. The way he touched me, the way he made me feel like I was the only thing that mattered. For the first time in years I felt wanted, not tolerated, not endured. Wanted. "Are you sure?" he murmured against my skin, his lips trailing down my neck. "Yes," I whispered, my voice breathless. His hands slid beneath the fabric of my dress, his touch firm but careful, like he was savoring every inch of me. My skin felt like it was on fire, every nerve ending sparking to life under his fingertips. When he pulled back to look at me, his eyes were filled with something I couldn't quite name. Desire? Yes, but also something softer, something that made my heart ache in a way I wasn't prepared for. "You're beautiful," he said, his voice rough. I opened my mouth to respond, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I leaned in, capturing his lips with mine once more. We didn't make it to the bedroom. Somewhere between the couch and the floor, we gave up trying to hold back, our movements growing more frantic, more desperate. His shirt was the first to go, followed by my dress, pooling around my feet like a crimson puddle. The sensation of his bare skin against mine was overwhelming, every touch igniting something inside me that I didn't know had been lying dormant. When it was over, we lay tangled together on the rug, our breathing heavy and uneven. I stared at the ceiling. my mind racing with 1,000 different thoughts, none of which I could hold on to for more than a second. Beside me, Ethan shifted, propping himself up on one elbow to look down at me. His fingers brushed a strand of hair from my face, his touch feather-light. "You okay?" he asked softly. I nodded, but the truth was I didn't know, because this, whatever this was, had changed something. And there was no going back. I woke up to the sound of my phone buzzing on the coffee table. My body felt heavy, a pleasant ache lingering in my muscles as I slowly opened my eyes. For a moment, I didn't remember where I was or why the throw blanket from the couch was draped loosely over me. But then it hit me. Ethan, the club. The kiss that had spiraled into so much more. I glanced to my left, expecting to see him still asleep beside me, but the space was empty. The air carried the faint scent of him, warm and woodsy, and I spotted his leather jacket folded neatly over the arm of the couch. Sitting up, I pulled the blanket tighter around me, my mind racing. The logical part of me screamed that this was a mistake, but the part of me that had been so desperately lonely, so starved for attention, felt something dangerously close to satisfaction. My phone buzzed again, yanking me out of my thoughts. I grabbed it, my heart sinking when I saw Brian's name on the screen. For a second, I debated letting it go to voicemail, but the longer I stared at the screen, the more I felt a knot of guilt twisting in my stomach. Finally, I swiped to answer. "Hello?" I said, my voice hoarse from lack of sleep and other things I didn't want to think about. "You finally decided to answer?" Brian said, his tone sharp. "Where the hell were you last night?" The question hit me like a slap. "What do you mean?" "Don't play dumb, Lauren. I called you 3 times. You didn't answer." "I was out with Melissa," I said quickly, the lie slipping out before I could stop it. "I guess I didn't hear my phone over the music." There was a pause, and for a moment I thought he might buy it. But then he laughed, a low, bitter sound that sent a chill down my spine. "Melissa," he repeated, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Right, and I suppose Melissa was the one who had a man over while her husband was working late?" My blood turned to ice. "What are you talking about?" I asked, my voice trembling despite my best efforts to sound calm. "Don't lie to me, Lauren," he snapped. "I saw everything. The cameras don't lie." The words hit me like a freight train. I'd forgotten about the security cameras, forgotten that Brian insisted on installing them after we moved into this house, citing safety as his excuse. I felt my chest tighten, panic clawing at the edges of my mind. "Brian, I can explain." "Don't bother," he cut me off. "You think I'm stupid? That I wouldn't notice you sneaking around behind my back like some horny teenager?" The venom in his voice was like nothing I'd ever heard before. Brian was no stranger to anger, but this was different. This wasn't frustration or disappointment. This was rage, pure and unfiltered. "You don't understand," I tried again, but the words sounded hollow, even to me. "Oh, I understand perfectly," he spat. "You've been unhappy for years, and instead of talking to me like an adult, you throw on some slutty dress and let the first guy who gives you attention fuck you in our living room." Tears stung my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. "It's not like that," I said, my voice cracking. "Then what is it like, Lauren? Enlighten me," he said coldly. I couldn't answer. I didn't have the words to explain how it had happened, why it had happened. All I knew was that I'd been drowning, and Ethan had been the first person to throw me a lifeline. The silence on the other end of the line stretched, heavy and suffocating. Finally, Brian spoke again, his tone eerily calm. "I'm not doing this over the phone," he said. "I'll be home in an hour. Be ready." The line went dead before I could respond, leaving me staring at the screen in stunned silence. The house felt impossibly quiet as I waited for him to come home. I'd already showered, scrubbing my skin raw, as if that could erase the evidence of what had happened. I'd changed into a simple sweater and jeans, trying to look as unassuming as possible, but nothing could soften the tension coiled in my chest. When Brian finally walked through the door, his expression was unreadable. He set his briefcase down by the stairs and loosened his tie, his movements slow and deliberate. "Brian?" I started, but he held up a hand to silence me. "Sit," he said, nodding toward the couch. I obeyed, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. He stood over me, his eyes cold and unyielding. "Do you even realize what you've done?" he asked, his voice low but steady. I swallowed hard. "It wasn't planned. I didn't mean for it to happen." But it did, he interrupted. You let it happen. I was lonely, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. I felt invisible, like I didn't matter to you anymore. His laugh was sharp and humorless. So what? You thought fucking the neighbor would solve all your problems? No? Do you even know what this could cost us? He demanded, his voice rising. What if someone else finds out? What if this gets out at work? My career, my reputation, everything I've worked for could be ruined because you couldn't keep your legs closed. The words cut deep, but I didn't have the strength to fight back. I'm sorry, I said, my voice breaking. Sorry doesn't fix this, Lauren, he snapped. Sorry doesn't undo what you've done. He paced the room, running a hand through his hair as he tried to rein in his anger. Finally he stopped, turning to face me with a look that sent a chill down my spine. This is what's going to happen, he said, his tone cold and calculated. You're going to end whatever the hell this is with him. You're going to block his number, avoid him like the plague, and pretend he doesn't exist. Do you understand me? I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. And if you don't, he continued, I'll make sure he regrets ever laying a hand on you. And you can kiss this house, your job, and whatever little shred of dignity you have left goodbye. His threat hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. I wanted to argue, to push back, but the look in his eyes told me it would only make things worse. I understand, I said quietly, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. Good, he said, his voice clipped. Because if you screw this up again, I swear to God, Lauren, you'll wish you hadn't. With that, he grabbed his briefcase and headed upstairs, leaving me alone in the silence once more. I sat there for a long time, staring at the empty space where he'd been standing. The weight of his words pressed down on me, suffocating and inescapable. I should have felt relieved that he hadn't kicked me out, that he was giving me a chance to fix things. But all I felt was emptiness, a hollow ache that gnawed at my insides and refused to let go. Somewhere deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Not with Ethan, not with Brian, and not with me. The days that followed felt like walking through quicksand. Every moment was heavy, deliberate, and suffocating, as though even breathing too loudly might set Brian off again. He barely spoke to me unless it was absolutely necessary, and when he did, his words were sharp-edged and clipped. The tension in the house was unbearable, but I stayed because, honestly, I didn't know what else to do. I deleted Ethan's number the morning after Brian's ultimatum. I avoided the hallway windows and the sound of footsteps in the apartment corridor, terrified that even a casual glance in Ethan's direction might ignite the powder keg that was my marriage. But it wasn't as simple as pretending he didn't exist. Ethan had been my escape, my proof that I wasn't invisible, and now the silence between us was louder than anything Brian could throw at me. I hadn't seen him since that night, until today. I was in the parking lot, juggling my work bag and a grocery bag when I saw him leaning against his car. He was on the phone, his voice low and casual, but the moment he spotted me, his words faltered. Yeah, I'll call you back, he muttered, slipping his phone into his pocket. I froze. My keys were halfway to the car door, my pulse racing as Ethan started walking toward me. Lauren, he said softly, his tone cautious, like he was testing the waters. I glanced around, half expecting Brian to come storming out of nowhere, but the lot was quiet, save for a few distant sounds of traffic. What are you doing here? I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. I live here, he said, a faint smirk tugging at his lips, though it didn't reach his eyes. You've been avoiding me. Because I have to, I said, lowering my voice. Brian knows about us. His expression darkened and he took another step closer. What do you mean he knows? He saw the security footage, I admitted, glancing down at my hands. He knows everything. Ethan swore under his breath, raking a hand through his hair. Did he hurt you? No, I said quickly, though the memory of Brian's cold fury still sent a chill down my spine. But he threatened to ruin both of us if I didn't cut you off. Ethan's jaw tightened, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. And you're just gonna let him control you like that? What choice do I have? I asked, my voice cracking. He's my husband, Ethan. He's got leverage I can't fight against. Ethan didn't respond immediately. Instead, he studied me, his eyes searching mine for something I wasn't sure I could give him. Finally, he let out a heavy sigh. This isn't over, he said, his tone quiet but firm. Yes, it is, I whispered. though the words felt hollow even as I said them. He didn't argue, but the look in his eyes told me he didn't believe me. That night, I stayed awake long after Brian had gone to bed, staring at the ceiling and replaying the conversation with Ethan in my head. I wanted to believe it was over, that I could close this chapter and move on. But the ache in my chest told a different story. When my phone buzzed on the nightstand, I grabbed it instinctively, my heart leaping into my throat when I saw the message. Ethan, I need to talk to you. It's important. I hesitated, my fingers hovering over the screen. I should have ignored it, deleted it, done anything but open Pandora's box again, but instead I typed 2 words, me, not now. The reply came almost immediately. Ethan, tomorrow. Meet me at the park at 7, please. I didn't respond, but I didn't delete the message either. The next evening, I told Brian I was running errands after work. He barely looked up from his laptop, muttering something about dinner being in the fridge, and I left before he could ask any questions. The park was quiet, the sun sinking low on the horizon and casting everything in a warm, golden light. I spotted Ethan sitting on a bench near the fountain, his shoulders tense as he stared at the water. When he saw me, he stood, his expression softening with a mix of relief and hesitation. You came, he said, his voice carrying a weight that made my stomach twist. I can't stay long, I said, crossing my arms over my chest. He nodded, gesturing for me to sit. I won't take up too much of your time. I hesitated before sitting beside him, keeping a careful distance between us. What's so important? I asked, my tone clipped. Ethan didn't answer right away. Instead, he pulled something from his pocket, a manila envelope, and handed it to me. What is this? I asked, frowning as I took it. Just open it, he said quietly. I did, my hands trembling as I pulled out a stack of photos. My heart dropped as I realized what I was looking at. Pictures of Brian, sitting across from a woman in a cafe, his hand resting on hers, their faces inches apart. What? I breathed, flipping through the images. There were more. Brian leaving the cafe with the woman, the 2 of them getting into a car together, his hand on her lower back. I didn't want to believe it, Ethan said, his voice low. But I've seen them together more than once. I thought you should know. My mind reeled, the photos blurring in my hands as 1,000 questions fought for dominance. How long had this been going on? Who was she? Did Brian love her? Was this why he'd been so cold, so distant? I'm sorry, Ethan said, his voice pulling me back to the present. I know this isn't what you wanted to hear, but you deserve the truth. I stared at the photos for what felt like an eternity before shoving them back into the envelope. My hands were shaking, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst. Why are you doing this? I asked, my voice trembling. Because I care about you, he said simply. I left the park without another word, the envelope clutched tightly in my hands. When I got home, Brian was in the kitchen, pouring himself a glass of wine. He looked up when I walked in, his eyes narrowing slightly as he took in my expression. Everything okay? He asked, his tone laced with suspicion. I set the envelope on the counter between us, my hands still trembling. You tell me. His eyes flicked to the envelope, his jaw tightening as he realized what it was. Lauren, I can explain. No, I said, my voice steady for the first time in days. You can't. For the first time in years, I saw fear in Brian's eyes, and it gave me a strength I didn't know I had. This marriage is over, I said quietly, turning and walking away before he could say another word. As I sat alone in the quiet of my bedroom, the weight of everything crashed down on me. My marriage was a lie, my life was in shambles, and I had no idea what came next. But for the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. I didn't sleep that night. The house felt heavier than ever, its silence oppressive, like it was holding its breath. Brian hadn't followed me upstairs after I told him it was over. I didn't know where he was. If he was sitting in the kitchen, nursing his wine, or if he'd stormed out into the night. But I didn't care. For once, I wasn't thinking about what he would do or say. I wasn't trying to fix things, to smooth over the cracks in a marriage that had been crumbling for years. For the first time in forever, I was thinking about what I wanted. By the time the sun started to rise, I'd made up my mind. I packed a bag before Brian woke up. Just the essentials, a few changes of clothes, my laptop, and the envelope of photos Ethan had given me. I wasn't sure where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay. When I came downstairs, Brian was sitting in the living room, staring blankly at the wall. His tie was still undone from the night before, his shirt wrinkled and untucked. He looked up when he heard me, his eyes bloodshot and rimmed with exhaustion. "You're really doing this?" he said, his voice hollow. "Yes," I said simply, my grip tightening on the strap of my bag. He stood, his movements slow and deliberate, like he was trying to keep himself together. "And where are you going exactly?" "I don't know," I admitted, "but anywhere is better than here." He laughed bitterly, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "You think this is going to solve anything? Leaving like this?" "It's not about solving anything," I said, my voice firm. "It's about starting over." Brian shook his head, his expression a mix of anger and disbelief. "You're going to regret this, Lauren. You think you're free, but you're not. Not from me. Not from the mess you've made." The threat in his words hung heavy in the air, but I didn't flinch. "You don't control me anymore," I said quietly, turning and walking toward the door. I didn't look back as I drove away from the house, my heart pounding in my chest. The weight of what I'd done, the finality of it, pressed down on me, but it wasn't the suffocating kind of weight I'd grown used to. This was something else, something lighter, freedom. I didn't go far. Just a small motel on the outskirts of town, the kind of place where no one asked questions. The room was basic, beige walls, a scratchy bedspread. But it was mine. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. I spent the next few days in a haze, trying to piece together what my life would look like now. I filed for separation, contacted a lawyer, and started looking for apartments. It was overwhelming, terrifying, but also exhilarating. And then there was Ethan. He texted me the day after I left Brian. Just one word, "Okay?" I stared at the message for a long time, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. I didn't know what to say to him, or if I even should. He'd been a catalyst, a spark that lit the fire I didn't know I had in me, but he wasn't the answer. Still, I couldn't ignore him. Not completely. I'm fine, figuring things out. His reply came quickly. "Ethan, if you need anything, I'm here." I didn't respond after that, but knowing he was there, knowing someone cared, meant more than I wanted to admit. A week later, I found myself back at the park where we'd last met. I wasn't sure why I went there. Maybe I was hoping for closure, or maybe I just wanted to feel the sun on my face after days of hiding. To my surprise, Ethan was there. He was sitting on the same bench, a sketch pad in his lap and a pencil in his hand. He looked up when he saw me, his eyes widening slightly before a small smile curved his lips. "Lauren," he said, setting the sketch pad aside as I approached. "Didn't think I'd see you here." "I didn't think I'd come back," I admitted, sitting down beside him. He didn't say anything, and for a while we just sat there, the sound of the fountain filling the silence between us. "Thank you," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. "For what?" he asked, glancing at me. "For everything," I said. "For helping me see what I couldn't, for giving me the push I needed." Ethan nodded, his gaze dropping to his hands. "I didn't want to complicate things for you," he said quietly. "But I couldn't just stand by and do nothing." "You didn't complicate things," I said, shaking my head. "You made me realize I deserved more than what I was settling for." He looked at me then, his eyes filled with something I couldn't quite name. "So what now?" I hesitated, the question hanging in the air between us. "What now?" I didn't have an answer, not yet. "I don't know," I admitted, "but I think that's okay." Ethan smiled softly, his hand brushing mine in a gesture that was more comforting than romantic. "Yeah, it is." As I walked away from the park, I felt a strange sense of peace. My life was still a mess, and I had no idea what the future held, but for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid. This wasn't the end. It was a beginning.